These are warm-up drawings. This first warm-up drawing, I'm going to draw a 3/4 view head bottom lit. And there's all sorts of problems when you bottom light something because it reverses all the concepts that we have been practicing towards under normal lighting conditions. Normal lighting conditions being overhead lit. This being a warm-up, I'm not starting with anything too formal. No formal structure here other than the boundary of the head. I have started with a contour of sorts, so I have an enclosure or a space to put everything else into. But as I'm putting the picture information together, I'm not being too academic about it. I'm not being too literal towards a course of action about it. But you can see that all of those steps that we learn in that literal process, all of those steps are taking place in the drawing. They're just scattered about now. I'm using tools out of order instead of in sequence. The nice thing about a drawing versus construction, I don't need to have 2x4s cut ahead of time to build up the foundation. I can actually just put a few things in here and there, and that acts enough as a bit of foundation for me that can serve the purpose of helping me put more information into the picture. By drawing this way in this freestyle fashion, what I'm doing in respect to the technical part of it is I'm looking for edge and I'm looking for shape. The edge is the outline, the shape is the tone. And I'm working with both of them together successively to help build up the picture, one little bit at a time. I blasted in the back of the hair so that I've defined the darker areas and defined the majority of the skull. And then that helps me balance out all of the little shapes that I'm putting into the features in the front of the skull. I'm working towards a finish as I start. I'm hoping that I can find all the right edges and values in the turn of the form all at the same time. And when that doesn't happen, it doesn't mean I can't go back in and work on it. It just means that those spontaneous brush strokes are going to be lost to a little bit more work. These warm-ups are a couple of different things. One, it's an exercise in practicing your tool sets and letting go of them to see what you know about what you're looking at and how to define it technically as a craftsman. The other thing this exercise is doing is it's allowing me to quote unquote freestyle my drawing or find a way of putting a picture together without using all those rules that hopefully help me become me more specifically as an artist. At some point, those academic rules, everybody using them blurs together a little bit. And unless we kind of find a few functions that help separate us apart, everybody ends up looking a little bit the same. So these freestyle moments for me are helping me also kind of look for me, my way of working, my way of putting tones down, and they're definitely practice for shading, making sure that I still know how to, making sure that I still have the dexterity to perform the way I need to. As a career artist, you have to keep those things up. It's practice. Very much like a musician has to continue practicing scales and all the other basic elements of music making. They have to continue practicing those, otherwise they go a little rusty in them. And I definitely don't want to go rusty, especially if I'm teaching somebody how to do something. Or if I'm doing something for a commission, I better not be rusty. Every now and again, you'll see my pencil break. Our modern day equipment is not so sturdy. I'm barely pushing a lot of the time in these drawings, and yet the leads will snap on me all the time. In this case, charcoal. The charcoal will snap. Materials aren't poorly made necessarily, but they are poorly distributed. Pencils are not put into special crates with pressure sensitive walls and so forth. They're stuck in a cardboard box like everything else. And if you work at UPS or at a post office, or if you've ever been to one of those and seen how they work, a lot of the time the guys are throwing those boxes around. They're not handling them delicately the way you think they should. And a lot of the time in shipping, these pencils already start to crack and break. Generals is notorious for having soft charcoal. And if they're handled poorly, they can break before they're ever sharpened. And that can be the case, and many times is the case with me when I go to buy brand new pencils. I'll go through about 3 or 4 of them before I actually have one I can work with, which is sad because that's all that money gone. and most art stores don't replace a broken pencil. I save all the little chunks, however, and grind them down into charcoal powder and use that later on. At least I'm getting my money's worth somewhere. Charcoal powder is just as valid a material to draw with as the charcoal pencil. I'm using the pencils here, however, for practical purposes and for mechanical purposes. But later on in one of the DVDs, I'll go over a demonstration using charcoal powder. Just like all of the long drawings that you'll be watching on this DVD, this drawing is going through a series of value relationships between lights and darks. I'm not using outlines, I'm using tones to help me balance out the realism of this picture, where the light source is coming from. I'll define an edge with a line, and then I'll fill it with a tone. So, as I said in the very beginning of this particular drawing, I'm working with two tools, tones and outlines, and they're going hand in hand with each other. The tone is the fence I put up, or the outline is the fence that I put up, and the tone is the grass that I fill the yard up with. I'm softening these values here by adding broader strokes of tone, and then when I need to get specific about a feature, I'll lean up on the pencil tip more, like I'm doing here in the mouth. I'm being more specific with the tip of the pencil than I am with the broad side of the pencil. And then going back into these bigger spaces, I'll use the broad side of the pencil a little more liberally and not think too much about sharp or tight or little. Most of the broad strokes are just that. They're very large, broad strokes covering ground very quickly. Lots and lots of ground very quickly. When I stall out here in the drawing, I'm comparing shapes. I'm looking at the model and I'm looking at my drawing and I'm trying to find out where the measurement is off. And that's what we need to do a lot. We need to back up from our drawing and take in the big picture. It's very difficult to step back from the picture and look at the whole thing. We typically get caught up in the last marking that we put into the picture, or the last feature that we just tried to define. And we have to really generalize when we back up. We can't be that distinct, because when we do, that's a detail, and those details will tend to overshadow the big picture, and it is the big picture that we're after, not the details. The hypocrisy of draftsmanship. We're making a big picture. The big picture is about all things at once. But in order to do that, we have to focus on all the little pieces one at a time. That is where most pictures fall apart. By building up the little pieces and forgetting the big picture, all those little pieces can fracture a picture by having too many shapes, too many values, and too many edges in their spaces, where other places are very bland and generic or generalized. There needs to be a distribution of balance between little shapes, big shapes, soft edges and hard edges, and all of them for the effect of the big picture. Backing up from the picture allows us to see all of this at once. When we're developing up the small features, we're looking at one space at a time, and we're not so much conscious of the big picture unless we practice that. Unless we practice looking at small things and constantly arrive at a bigger conclusion when we do. The differences here in this warm-up versus the longer, more finished drawings that I do here on this DVD, the difference is the way I'm approaching it. I'm being more general with the strokes, and I'm being simpler with the mechanics of the drawing. I haven't put in a jawline. I haven't put in the 3/4 line along the edge of the cheek to the zygomate to the corner of the mouth. I've neglected to put those bits of information into the picture, and I'm going for a broader, more general brushstroke. So I stall out a lot more to look at the big picture, because without those little defined things in there, I'm really on my own, and I'm kind of in the unknown looking for things and how things come together. Practicing this more often makes those unknown things a tool, a useful tool. And what I mean by that is that I'm learning how to draw a picture, moshing the tools up. And when I do that, I have to look for different traits within the drawing. Each time I draw this way, I practice that particular routine, and it makes it a little bit easier for me to see the things that I'm supposed to see specifically. It becomes my style or my way of working. Just like several years in school define a certain way of working in you, because that's the only way you work while you're in school, that one particular way. So now I'm looking at the smaller shapes, and I'm using the pencil tip more often than I'm using the broad side of the pencil. I'm defining sharper clarity amongst the features. I'm looking for termination points where the light or the gradations need to end. So sometimes these edges that I put in or these lines that I put in aren't necessarily going to be sharp, but they are specific. They are the boundary to stop things from moving. And I use the analogy of a yard a lot. The outlines are the fences and the tones are the grass that's in the yard. And when I can, I try to playfully define things in that sense, because when I try to define things more technically, that's when things get a little confusing in drawing. Sometimes the technical rules that we learn get altered, or they're broken in substitution for a better technical rule or a better solution that sometimes doesn't require technical at all, but just a keen eye, good observation, good taste, and the know-how to arrive at a better conclusion. When I'm working on one eye, I'm working on both. I'm trying to pair them up as much as possible. In the case of this light source, it is obscuring the balance of the features a little bit. It's playing a little bit of a problem to the balance of them, making one side feel sharper and the other side feel blurrier. So it is up to me to overdevelop sometimes a few edges here and there in the picture to create a stronger sense of balance or a stronger sense of the likeness. Here I am putting in the neck and the collar, and you won't see that until I back the camera up, but it is important to have a collar in the picture, or a neckline, or a shoulder line, so the head isn't just floating on the page. This drawing would definitely benefit from a lot of tone in the front of it to help make this face feel like it's glowing, and I will probably do that on another sitting away from the video camera. All of these drawings being is that they're just warm-ups for the longer, more mechanical drawings, the longer demonstrations. I wasn't too concerned about making pictures here. I'm more concerned about just getting my brain up to speed with seeing features and looking at values and knowing how to balance tones and edges and remembering what it is that I'm supposed to be doing. All of that stuff does take a little bit of time. That's what warm-ups are for. I would probably, as a good bonus rule, I would probably put in the back of my mind not to start a drawing raw, not to start a drawing just by walking over to the art table and beginning, but to start the drawing process off with a few warm-ups of some kind, whether they be shape exercises, tone exercises, practicing drawing circles or ellipses, practicing straight lines, gradations, or what have you. Any of those things that you can start off with is going to warm you up. It's going to get your arm and wrist warmed up. Just like in sports, stretching is a good thing. And these are our kind of shorthand stretches that get us a little closer to flexible and our brain a little more conscious from where we were just previously, more aware and more alert of the artful things that we're going to be trying to accomplish as we draw a picture. When we draw, we definitely switch up our brain and we don't think the way we normally would. We have to turn off all of the tools that tell us to not bump into the wall here, to be able to pick something up over there, to define something as we look at it. The apple is that, the person is this, that is Joe, that is Bob, that is Jane, blah, blah, blah. Those are definitions. That's our dictionary mind. The dictionary mind has to shut off, and we have to turn on the shape recognition mind, the value and edge recognition mind. The more technical aspects of art, those have to be tuned up and turned on for us to draw pictures. Without those things on, without our conscious awareness of what those things are that we're supposed to be looking for, we could mindlessly draw our way into a whole bunch of problems. Here I'm starting to put in some of the sharper edges that define that light source from underneath, that underlighting. And it feels to me like the camera might have been a little bit bright on this shot because some of the halftones feel a little lighter than they could be in reality. But I am going to go back through all of these drawings one more time and clean them up a little bit, reshoot them and apply them to the DVD so that you can see what more of a finish would look like where I just didn't have enough time for any of these drawings, including the warm-ups. But what I did benefit from these warm-ups is a little bit more speed, a little bit more confidence and speed to get something done in a short amount of time and define all of the different aspects of how I'm building the picture along the way. So with this picture process here, with this warm-up, I started backwards. I didn't start with any lines. I'm actually kind of finishing with those lines. I started with bigger tones. The broader side of the pencil helped me place those broad tones into the picture space. And then from there, I tuned up instead of loosen up. I'm tuning up to a finer detail. I'm tuning up to the sharper edge or the point of the pencil. I'm tuning up to the more clarity within the picture space. All of those things I'm doing at the end of the drawing instead of at the beginning of the drawing. And I can do those now because the picture base, what's underneath, the simple setup, was solid enough for me to follow. I don't really have anything obscure or unknown in the picture where it would be a battle or very difficult for me to define something. I sneak up on the shapes little bits at a time as you're watching here, patches of tone, one patch at a time. I push only so hard with the pencil because it should be the pencil's weight that defines the tone that you apply, not the heavy-handedness of your arm and your hand. Drawing sideways like this prevents you from knuckling down on the picture and weighting everything down from your fingertips. Using the pencil on its side, it's helping me draw from my shoulder. Although it does look like I'm just drawing from the fingertips, I'm actually not. I'm drawing from the shoulder. My hand is wiggling back and forth to put tone down, but you can see how freely my arm is moving and my hand is going in different places, and I'm able to pitch it at different angles, holding the pencil vertically or sideways, horizontally, or at an angle, freely because I'm not restricted by one way of holding the pencil. Holding it sideways allows me to kind of flip the pencil through my fingers, hold it at the back, hold it at the front, and all the while it's my shoulder that's helping me define all of the values and the edges that I'm putting in. And the fingertips are nothing more than the little mechanical tool holding the pencil so that it doesn't go flying out of my hand. Now I'm on the last wave of this warm-up, and as a warm-up will be, these aren't going to be particularly beautiful and quality finishes, but they're good enough for me to say, yes, I'm in the right working mode and I can do something to a finish and feel pretty confident about it. And this warm-up has definitely helped me see that. With such a difficult light source as this one is with bottom lighting or up lighting, I'm able to control the lighting a little better now by seeing those brighter spots. And the difficulty of this is it lights the understructure of all of the features, not the top side of all of the features. That makes it really hard sometimes to look at the proportions of things, look at the big picture proportions. They will be thrown in reverse a little bit because the lighting is bouncing in a different direction. And sometimes they'll make a nose look a lot longer than it actually should be, or an eyeball a lot larger than it should be, because those cast shadows are so subtle and they're blending right in with some of the very edges of the features, making them look a little longer than they actually should or wider. You can see that I'm being careful not to push the lights too much. I'm reserving them for the very end of this drawing here. And I'm pushing a lot more halftones into the lights just so they're not blown out equally all over. They should be at their brightest at the bottom of the head, and then they should diminish a little bit as they creep up towards the eye sockets. And that's why I'm putting in these last bits of tone here at the top of the head. Rolling the top of the skull a little bit darker, helping push the shadow back into that space where it isn't yet. And it's helping make the lighter side more convincing. It's definitely telling us where the light source is coming from, where I think about 10 minutes ago into this drawing, it might have been a little unknown where that light source is coming from.